behalf of Raza Foundation and the India International Center, we welcome you to this second in the new series called Art Matters, which of course is going to consider various issues, some of them urgent, some of them appearing to be urgent, some of them eternal, etc., relating to the arts. And we had the first one on culture and democracy, which was a fairly general kind of thing. And now we get down to what may be more specifically art matters. The Raza Foundation, as some of you know, of course, has been founded by the master Syed Raza, who's personally present, who has returned to India after having spent 6 decades in Paris and France, and has exclusively funded this organization devoted to promotion of literature and the arts, particularly of the younger generation. And this is one of the series that we are starting. We are thankful to the India International Center that agreed to collaborate. We are also shortly starting a journal in English called Abstract, devoted to abstract art, ideas and poetry. We already have a journal in Hindi called Samas, जो कि साहित्य, कलाओं और विचार का त्रैमासिक है. And we do no more with us. Disappearing criticism is a provocative title. It is not only that criticism of the arts has disappeared from the media, more or less, but there are very few newspapers left which have still space for, but more generally, I think the critical spirit itself is on the wane, in spite of the fact that there seems to be a large many young critics around. For instance, in visual arts, you have the phenomena of catalogues, which are really homages to the artist, and there are hardly any critical note there. And there are, sort of very well endowed books coming out, and yet there is this feeling that perhaps the critical spirit, the interrogative spirit, is disappearing. The second aspect of the same problem is that we are faced with a situation which some of the most important artists, musicians, theatremen, dancers do not have a single critical book on them. I mean, we keep on hearing these great masters, and some of us have been fortunate enough to have seen them perform, but sadly, it is a sad situation that we hardly have books of any critical importance on them. Thirdly, I think a lot has changed. Also in these arts which are supposed to be somewhat more stable and somewhat more unchanging, like the classical arts. But I do not see, this is my view, this is not necessarily a view which should be shared by others, that the emerging poetics of these arts have yet to be inscribed, have yet to be critically explored and articulated. What has happened to many of these? Today there is an article, I don't remember where, in Crest or wherever, it says that we have all these institutions of dance and this, that, and the other, and the dance seems to be rather dismal, in the sense that if you look at the scene, how is it that it is dominated by old masters? I mean, still the partly it could be understood because masters are masters. If they are old, that doesn't make them, that doesn't stop them from being masters. But somehow, a kind of an avant-garde which will come and question and do a bit of तोड़ करे कुछ थोड़ी ये क्या है, हम कुछ नया करना चाहते हैं, कुछ ऐसा दुस्साहस करने वाले लोग युवाओं में बहुत कम हैं, और ऐसे दुस्साहस को समय पर पहचानने वाले लोग और भी कम हैं। इस समय विभिन्न कलाओं में, कम से कम ललित कलाओं में तो बहुत खलबली है, बड़ी उत्तेजना है, बहुत सक्रियता है, पर उसी अनुपात में आलोचना नहीं है, आलोचनात्मक विश्लेषण नहीं है। तो ये कुछ प्रश्न हैं जो हमने सोचा कि हमारे 3 मित्र यहाँ हैं जो आलोचनात्मक रूप से इन कलाओं की स्थिति से, इसमें जो हो रहा है उससे दो चार होते रहे हैं। इनका परिचय देने की आवश्यकता नहीं है। अंजना राजन जो हिंदू में लिखती रही हैं और ज़्यादातर तो उन्होंने नृत्य पर लिखा है, पर कुछ अन्य विधाओं पर भी कभी कभी हम जैसे लोगों को खाना खिलाने में ले जाती हैं। चोर बाजार जैसी जगह पर जहाँ की जाने का मेरा कभी उत्साह नहीं था, लेकिन वो बातचीत वहाँ भी होती है। सदानंद मेनन जिन्होंने आज ही हिंदू में एक लेख लिखा है और भारत में ये इस विषय पर भी हम लोग आएंगे देर सवेर। हमारा एक थीम है आर्ट एंड पब्लिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस, के पब्लिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस की जो स्थिति है उस पर भी कुछ विचार किया जाना चाहिए। सदानंद मेनन बरसों से खासकर परफॉर्मिंग आर्ट्स के सीन से बहुत शिद्दत से और गहराई से और विशेषज्ञता के साथ जुड़े रहे हैं। तीसरे हैं कुलदीप कुमार जो वैसे तो बाकायदा जर्नलिस्ट हैं। बाकायदा तो खैर कोई क्या होता है, जितना भी फायदा संभव है, लेकिन वो शास्त्रीय संगीत पर लिखते रहे हैं और इधर हिंदू में उन्होंने फिर से शास्त्रीय संगीत पर लिखना शुरू किया है। So there are these things, but before we start, we will try to greet them with some flowers, if you permit me. And since we have nobody else, I will do the ceremony myself. देना चाहिए। And the procedure that we are going to follow is a very simple one. Each one of these 3 experts would have 10 minutes to make an initial presentation. And then hopefully they'll start fighting with each other. Sort of not fighting, but they'll start getting into a dialogue of some kind with each other, agreeing and disagreeing. I hope there is more disagreement than agreement. And then of course it will be open to the audience. May I ask KULDEEP Kumar to start? He's sitting next to me anyway. You can speak from here if you want to go.
As you said, I am a Baqaida journalist, so I don't claim any special expertise, but I am really deeply interested in music, so I try to listen to it seriously and sometimes write on it. It's a coincidence that today it's the birth anniversary of Marx, and the leitmotif of Marx's work and life can be summed up in one word, that is critique. Quite a few of his works bore this title, like critique of, in fact the subtitle of the Das Kapital was critique of political economy, critique of Gotha program, critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. So this critique was the central theme. Stand and analyze a situation, a phenomenon, then you criticize it with the purpose of changing it. Criticism is not an idle criticism, it's aimed at changing, as he famously said in one of his theses, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world, the point is to change it. So it's a happy coincidence that today we are discussing criticism, its problems, and as the topic says, the disappearing criticism. See, the First function of criticism is valuation. Any critical activity, whether it is in the field of literature or music, I mean, it creates a kind of hierarchy of values, because once you start analyzing a text or a performance, you ultimately have to come to a conclusion saying it is good or bad, better or worse than this or that. So that is the primary function of criticism. And there are all kinds of criticism. I mean, as we can see in literature, there is academic criticism, which is very pedantic. Then there is criticism which practitioners themselves do. One prime example is sitting here. I mean, I still remember those essays collected in a book called Filhal. And in English also there are various great writers like T.S. Eliot, whose seminal essays are still read and admired by people. So that is a different kind of critical activity which is practiced by the practitioners of that art. And I think, in my view, that is much more valuable and much more important to understand and evaluate any form of creative endeavor. But there is another kind of criticism which comes from universities, from departments of literature or music or art, which is also valuable. I am not trying to belittle it, but it has its own limitations. Then there is a third kind of criticism which we read in newspapers, which has very severe limitations, because the person who is writing is not really sure of his readership, who is going to read. Then there are severe restrictions on the length. And if you have to write, say, 650 words or 600 words on a performance, then I think 150 words will be taken up by the names of the accompanists and the name of the main performer and where it was held and who was the organizer. So there is, very little remains, to be said. And as Ashokji pointed out, that very few newspapers now devote any space to reviews of painting exhibition or music or dance performances, or even serious book reviews. So this is a serious situation, and that is why I think this topic has cropped up, that disappearing criticism. But if we look at the scene of classical music, especially the Hindustani one, with which I am slightly familiar, it's a very strange situation. For almost 100 years we have had institutions of music and dance. In every university, nearly every university, there is a music department. Then there are several private institutions like Gandharva Mahavidyalaya, etc. And all of them say that, look, we are not producing tanseins, we are trying to produce kanseins, which is a very valid objective. But what surprises me is this, that they have, if they can't produce creative artists, performing artists, at least they can produce people who can write intelligibly on that art form. But these institutions have not been able to even produce writers on music or dance. And then musicians, they complain that people who write, they are not really all that well informed, and they don't understand the nuances, etc. But the problem is that those institutions which are training, youngsters, they don't have this vision. I'm sure that they can start courses in music appreciation and train people to write on music or to write on dance, so that when they get out of the institution after taking the degree, even if they don't become teachers or even if they don't become performing artists, at least they can write better than others on that art form, than music or dance. But even that is not happening. So all this has bearing on the, on the critical scene, because if there are not people in sufficient number to write, I'm sure the newspapers will also not take much notice of, and they will not pay much attention. So it's a kind of, it cuts both ways. So, and the other thing is that there is no attempt on the part of musicians themselves to educate their audiences. I'm sure that in the beginning of the performance, if they say a few words about what they are going to sing and how it goes, I'm sure that people who are in the audience, who are interested in listening to music, and they have come all the way from their homes, they will get a better understanding. And people who, the person who is going to write tomorrow in the newspaper, he may also get a better understanding, because not everybody is a great expert. So all this put together, points to a kind of a scenario where things are not being taken with the kind of seriousness that they should be taken. And I hope, as Ashokji said, that there are no good books on individual musicians, which is a very great, I think, lacuna that we have hardly, especially in Hindi and English. I am not sure about Bangla or Marathi, but in Hindi and English there are very few books which are good critical, accounts of great musicians. So all that shows that the the reservoir of critical, ability, that is drawing up, and I think it's the need of the hour to think about ways and means how this critical faculty can be restored and developed. Thank you.
Thank you. अंजना जी, अब आपकी बारी है.
धन्यवाद. वाजपेयी मिल गया, कहाँ से शुरू करें, क्योंकि मुझे लगता है कि बहुत सारी ऐसी बातें हैं जो कि क्रिटिसिज्म पर लागू होती हैं, लेकिन वो इसलिए हैं कि हमारे समाज में हैं. He spoke of भद्राचार से ही, उसके हिसाब से ही मुझे तो ये लगा. I asked him also, I said, why are you inviting me? There are so many people who can speak on this subject. And you see, before me, so many people who are so much older and more experienced than me and considered stalwarts in the field. So
they are the disappearing lot.
So this is what I mean to say, that these issues also, they affect criticism, because we have in the classical arts such a tradition of reverence. We revere age and experience, and sometimes we don't dare to say anything to an older person because they are older. But critiquing demands that we look it in the face. इसलिए हमें ये भी करना पड़ता है. दूसरी चीज़ ये है कि जब हम क्रिटिसिज्म की बात करते हैं, we speak of, वाजपेयी जी also said to me, हिंदी में बोल सकोगी, हिंदी भी थोड़ा होना चाहिए. So I said yes, I'll try. Unfortunately, I work for the English print media, and ये जो लैंग्वेज की इश्यू है ना, ये हमेशा हम रोज इससे जूझते हैं, क्योंकि हमारे जो आर्ट्स हैं वो ओरल ट्रेडिशन से, विजुअल ट्रेडिशन से आते हैं, मास्टर से शिष्य की ओर ट्रांसमिट किए जाते हैं। हमको कोई भी कला सिखाई जाती है तो हम सामने गुरु के सामने बैठते हैं, गुरुमुख से सीखते हैं। फिर उस चीज़ को हम अगर भाषा में उसका अनुवाद करना चाहेंगे तो हमको हमारा बहुत अधिकार होना चाहिए भाषा पर। I need to have a really good grip of the language. Now, if I'm writing in English, and as Kuldeep ji pointed out, newspapers have a real problem because they are trying to reach out to a very vast readership, a very vast spectrum. So we have people who know all about the arts, who are connoisseurs. We have artists themselves. We have people who are slightly interested, and we have people who will only get attracted if we give a snappy heading and a picture. So we have all kinds of people. We are trying to communicate to them all. Add to that in India, people are not 100% comfortable with the English language. So when I am trying to transmit the idea of a very visual medium like classical dance into language, then itself I may have a good grip of the language and I might use the most precise words, but maybe it won't make any sense to the reader because they don't know what I'm talking about and they don't have enough language to understand that most precise word. और हमें बताया जाता है जब हम अखबार में लिखते हैं तो हमारे रीडर को यदि डिक्शनरी की ओर जाना पड़ा तो हमारी हार है, तो that is also not allowed. So we are always negotiating a very difficult sort of path here. रही बाकायदा जर्नलिस्ट की बात, मैं जब पहले लिखती थी हिंदू के लिए, उससे पहले और अखबारों के लिए लिखती थी एज ए फ्रीलांसर, मैं लोगों से मिलती थी, लोग कहते थे आई नो यू जर्नलिस्ट, यू विल डू दिस एंड दैट, तुम हमारी बात ट्विस्ट कर दोगे। फिर मैं कहती थी आई एम नॉट अ जर्नलिस्ट, आई एम जस्ट अ राइटर। फिर जब हिंदू में मेरी नौकरी लग गई तो मैं ये तो कह नहीं सकती आई एम ऑल्सो अ कार्ड कैरिंग जर्नलिस्ट नाउ। But the thing is, I'm still not a बाकायदा journalist because I'm in features. Features वाले तो journalists माने ही नहीं जाते ज़्यादातर। Our arts are all in features. The thing is that if we don't give that much importance to the arts, then perhaps we will never give them the space. As somebody was saying over tea, it's so self-explanatory. Everybody on the panel is related to the Hindu. So many people in the audience are related to the Hindu. That's all we are. Some years ago, I remember there was a terrible uproar among the artists because the big Times had stopped. Maybe I'm being politically incorrect here, naming things, but they had decided to, as a policy, stop printing reviews, and people considered it really a travesty. There was a time when reviewers also were bakaida journalists rushing after the program. They'll rush to the newsroom and the next day that program will be reviewed in the paper, which I think was really quite an achievement, simply because reviewing is not so easy. You have to evaluate, it has to be filtered in your mind and then you decide to write. But they used to carry reviews of that sort. And then they just stopped carrying altogether. Hindu is hanging in there. So now the thing is, despite the fact that we are kind of all on the same side, we have a lot of differences of opinion. And some of those differences come from the nature of art and artists. Artists are supposed to be sensitive and create artwork, otherwise they would be doing something else. They might be making their contribution to society through other means. But they do it through art, so they need to be sensitive. However, in India, I think, in India I'm saying, well, this is my experience as an adult, that we often mistake critiquing for the kind of criticism where you're finding fault. We say, we use the word criticism in the ordinary sense, not in the technical sense of critiquing. So, artists do very often feel that you're criticizing just because you want to criticize, or you bring out, if you raise an issue, then you must be against them. If you're not for me, you've got to be against me. these issues we do deal with. On the other hand, somebody, again many years ago, there was a talk just like this. There was a very big panel of critics. I think maybe Leelaji was also there on stage, possibly Sunilji was also there on stage. I remember watching them, and one gentleman said a very beautiful thing. He said, I used to write music reviews, and somebody said to me, क्या आपने कलाकार की पीड़ा समझी है? मुझे वो बहुत अच्छी लगी वो चीज़. That's true, and I think that when I'm in a position to review, then I have to understand that, and I do, because as Charles Fabry said in his book, that if you have to really be in love with that art, you should also love artists, and then you can be a good reviewer, because then it probably does away with the idea of prejudice. If you start with the premise that I really love this person, even though I don't know them, I'm not talking about my friend and I don't want to give them a boost just because the person on stage is my friend, but I love the art, and so I love that there is effort happening here. So these are the things that I need to think about if I'm in the position of a reviewer. Then the other thing is that because we are working for a newspaper and we have a very wide audience, we also think that we need to be a bridge. So what are the things that we can do to attract people? Because I think when I was a youngster and I was reading the paper, if I saw something on dance, I really loved it and I would read it. But maybe if that person had written in really technical jargon, I might not have understood it. So I might not have been where I am today. I think it really does influence you, because lots and lots of people read. On the other hand, lots and lots of people also don't read. Today they only look at the pictures. And that is something that, again, it's part of society today. Our attention span may be small, and again, the nature of features particularly is such that you're supposed to have beautiful, colorful pictures on the page. You're supposed to draw people in visually. And when that happens, what happens? The reviewer might have written something which is very critical of the artist, but the picture is anyway beautiful. And for example, if I say, or anybody says something critical about the postures or about the laya, the rhythm of a dancer, or if somebody is singing not so well, especially, if you're singing not so well, how can you tell from the picture? They'll still look beautiful with that tanpura sitting there, and we will make a good layout because we want to make an attractive page. So then what happens? People are still happy. Nobody's going to read, very few people will read the review. So the other big question, I think, is that people mistake reviews for publicity. And they even feel everybody wants to be reviewed, no matter what their standard. In India, we also fudge the difference between amateurs and professionals. Totally. Nobody wants to be considered an amateur. And it's like, it's a bad word. I don't think it's a bad word. But if you're a professional, then you have to be prepared to hear it straight. And very few people are also prepared to hear it straight. So it goes both ways. I think I've seen both sides. I've seen, from the artist's point of view, I know what the artists think of journalists. I know what some journalists think of artists. And I know I myself have gotten a lot of flack from people from the outside. And I also know what happens at the desk when you are a freelancer, and what the desk can sometimes do or not do to your copy, which will make a lot of difference. So I think that these are the issues that they don't, I wouldn't say that they're problems. I think that these are issues that we need to deal with, and I think it's good when these kind of interactions take place, because I think that all these people who think that they are in different camps should realize that we are all in the same camp. And I must say something about Chor Bazaar, because the other things that happens when you are in features and you're trying to create bridges with people is that you think of different ways of attracting different kinds of readers. So the reader who is a connoisseur or who is already addicted to the arts will pick up a supplement like Friday Review and see what's happening in town, what happened last week, who performed, how did they perform. Or if there's an interview with a senior artist, let's see what that person has to say. On the other hand, the people who are attracted more by pictures and snappy headings will be interested in what kind of lunch Vajpayee had in Chor Bazaar. And it's nice on the way to find out, oh, he's a poet, he's the chairman of London Kala Academy, all those things at that time. This is what. So these are the things that one tries to do as a journalist to broaden the audience basically for the arts. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't want to butt in and say a few things, but I will leave it for a later time. But now SADANAND Menon. No. I was just wondering whether, in terms of evolution of a critical language for the arts, we seem to have completely forgotten that there has been a great aesthetic tradition to which we are heir, and there are already words and concepts which answer very sensitively to some of the things that are happening. But somehow that entire terminology and concepts seem to be totally lost. So we are now writing in a critical language which lacks resonance, which lacks really memory. And I'm talking of aesthetic and critical memory, because just as in arts you have memory, and one of the functions of the arts is to let you not forget. It's a battle against forgetting. Similarly, in the critical tradition there is a memory. It is not as if you are the first critic under the earth. It is not as if thousands of years of critical analysis and critical exegesis have not taken place. But that seemed to be completely sidelined. So I think this was the point. Anyway, SADANAND Menon.
I'm not going to wait for the three presentations to be over to get into the pitching, but I think already I'm tingling with a certain sense of difference that I'm feeling, and so I'd like to disagree with this proposition that we are all on the same side. I think we are not on the same side. There are many sides, and I think the acknowledgement of that multiplicity of sides, multiplicity of positions, multiplicity of language that Ashok was suggesting existed earlier, but seems to have probably been muted over the years. There is certainly in the Indian, let's say, literary tradition, the concept of commentary. I wonder if there was a concept of critique, but there was a concept of commentary. So Bharatamuni writing in Natyashastra would be followed by Abhinav Gupta who commented upon it, and then would be followed by, say, Nandikeshwar who commented upon it. So this constant commentary, which is also an updating of material, which is also refreshing of the material, which is also contemporizing of the material, was happening. And that certainly is a tradition, if you want to call it, which we have somewhere lost down the process. Because in the modern, let's say, processes of dissemination, we don't seem to have been able to build those institutions of commentary, neither in our academia nor in our media, and I dare say not even in our daily discourse. So then the critique gets sort of isolated into some brilliant moments. For me, one of the most exciting and extraordinary moments of criticism was the story I heard about Bala Saraswati, the great dancer, who was one day changing her sort of costume in the green room in an auditorium in Chennai, about to go on stage to perform. When a young person came running to her and said, "Balama, Balama, Balama, did you hear? That man who launched you many years ago, E. Krishna Iyer, very famous writer and one of the earliest dance historians and impresarios of classical dance in the South, who is the one who sort of eventually sort of pulled the dance material from the Devadasi and brought it to, cleaned it up and sanitized it and brought it onto the mainstream stage, middle class stage." So Krishna Iyer used to write prolifically, and apparently he had done a review A review, by the way, I feel is one of the most degraded forms of criticism. I don't consider it critique at all. Anyway, he had done a review in which he had praised a very young and upcoming dancer, and had sort of equated portions of her dance with the work of Bala Saraswati. So this young person came into the green room and said, Balama, do you know this is what he has done? So she was nonchalant, she was eating a pan and she was changing her jewelry. And she said, it's okay. So, you know what his name is? So that man said, yeah, Krishna Iyer. No, what's his full name? So, Krishna Iyer, E. Krishna Iyer. Now, in Tamil, E also means a fly. So, she said, what does an E do? Very kind of unperturbed. So, what does an E do? It sits with the same facility on a piece of sweet and a piece of shit. And that was it. And I thought that was a absolutely trenchant critique of the moment. A kind of condensation of language and imagery, which I don't think we have in our popular media at the moment. It's like she says, or like KULDEEP said, 150 words, 120 words go to just name people and, stuff like that. I do remember many years ago when I was working in the Sunday Observer, a very interesting review column of Doordarshan programs that was done by what was his name? Bhagat, the young journalist who died very early. Dhiren, who did a 150-word review of the television highlight of the previous week. And all the 150 words said Rajiv Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Rajiv. And that was a critique, certainly it was a critique. So there are ways of doing it. Now the issue is we are discussing two things here. One is criticism in the popular space, which could be the media, which could be electronic media, print media, probably on the net. It could be the seminar kind of discourse place. Now here, the language of the person who's doing it is no longer the language of the person, would be a contention I'd like to make. If KULDEEP is doing his music reviews, if Anjana is doing her dance reviews, if I'm doing some literary review, then what we write and what we speak and the words we use are no longer our words. They belong to a different, let's say, they're possessed by a different activity, and that is called the culture industry. And it's a culture industry that determines space, that determines form, that determines presentation, that determines who will proceed over whom, and that will determine whose work should be, written about, what the style should be, who should be accepted, who should be dismissed. It's a culture industry that provides the framework for it, and we'll come to that a little bit. I'd like to sort of amplify this a little more as I go along. So there is a very interesting, let's say, modern media context within which the idea of critique is in fact a fake idea. What I'd like to say is that critique is not disappearing. There is a huge amount of critique happening, a huge amount of reflection and careful thought happening. Only thing, it is not finding space into the spaces that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. You have to search for it. You have to go into a library. You have to go to very specialized, spaces to get it. But let's not make the mistake of imagining it doesn't exist. I think scholarship is increasing. There's a great amount of research work going on. There's a great amount of refinement of language happening in those spaces. It doesn't appear in the daily media, and therefore we say criticism is vanishing, or what appears is so debased and so deformed and so loose and, in one sense, kind of, in Tamil, this lovely word, kora kora, it's all limp like that. It doesn't say anywhere. It's kind of waffling kind of activity. Now, some of the, let's say, art forms that we talk about have also a historic problematic attached to it. Dance, for example, is definitely a form, classical dance, a form that suffers from this historic problematic. The historic problematic is we have imagined for ourselves and we have convinced ourselves. Classical music somehow has escaped that a little bit, but it's on the borderline. Krishna is sitting here, so I can take the liberty of sort of pitching into the music also. The problematic of imagining that this is of divine origin. So Shiva Nataraja danced on Kailasha. Bharata Muni was present there, sat there with his notebook and Vaikhata and wrote it down. And that divine text then we inherited as humanity, or Punya Bhumi of this subcontinent. And those who therefore appear on stage and dance are divine apsaras. And in the front of divinity, you go with a worshipful attitude. You don't go with a critical attitude, for heaven's sake. So I who go and see that classical form, I go like that. I go as a devotee. I simply cannot go as a critic. And whenever I try to employ contemporary critical categories to those performances, I fall flat. It doesn't work. Because you are amidst the believers, in a Napoleon sense. And it's very difficult to separate from that. So if dance performance needs a developed criticism, then the dance performance itself has to change. We as a society should be able to take that caboodle called Bharatanatyam and throw it out of the window and say, sorry, this was a moment of illusion, of nationalist whatever, revival, whatever. It was a moment of illusion. And let us relook at what the body is. Let's relook at the relevance of all this in our times, in a very, very contentious and extremely sort of fractious times. What is this idealized form doing there? What is this idealization of body all about? Now, until we do that, until we as a society have the sensibility, the strength, the ability to handle that, we will continue to face this problem of inability to critique these particular forms. So eventually, the more serious critique goes to literature, to cinema, music, a little bit certainly, theatre, yeah, and many other forms fall by the wayside because they don't fall within the framework of critique. Now, therefore, for me, the starting point of a discussion like this would be to evoke my favorite thinker, philosopher, Walter Benjamin, who has made that unforgettable sentence that there is no document of culture. Let me repeat, there is no document of culture which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. And we need to realize, therefore, that all artistic production is a product of a conflict out there. We cannot run away from that. It's not. So therefore, I would disagree with ANJANA's position, for example, that the sensitivity of the individual artist. I don't believe such sensitive individual artists exist. Every artist, as everybody else, every other professional, carries blood on them because you're part of that conflict. You're in the society where conflict is happening. Let us not, erase that from our mind. Kuldeep's sort of connection with the Marxian landmark was very important. I think he was one of the critics. We don't need to call him a political philosopher. He was a journalist, actually, who wrote some absolutely brilliant journalistic pieces. But he pointed out the importance of constantly remembering this idea of conflict. And therefore, the conflict that creates what in a simpler word can be called contradictions in society. And then therefore you have a large amount of production, intellectual production, aesthetic production, artistic production, some of which will deliberately try to mask this conflict. It's the task of many of these art forms to mask the conflict through a certain kind of reification, beautification, etc. I mean, the theories evolve around it. There's a Raza theory, there is a poetics, all kind of interesting things will emerge around it. But we should not be able to, we should not make the mistake of forgetting that there is a masking attempt that is going on. and therefore it falls within the realm of what is called ideological. Much of this becomes ideological work, and works that attempt very consciously to foreground the conflict, to put it in your face and say, look, there is this blood flowing in the streets, as Pablo Neruda said, come and see the blood in the streets. They would be probably or more clearly be identified as political artists. So the interesting thing is, much of this conflict has a invisible character to it. Again, to revert to a category that Marx made very popular, class conflict. Class conflict is invisible. In this room, at this moment, class conflict is happening, but it's invisible. We don't know. We are not battling each other, we are not strangling each other, we are not picking up arms, but there is a class conflict at work, and the space sort of encapsulate that, our environment encapsulates that, but there's an invisibility to it, and the more, let's say, palpable ones, the more recognizable ones would be in the category of power and hegemony. As is very clear, in this room, the power belongs to this side of the table. We have the power of the mic, and that's it. You just have to sit and listen, sorry. So hegemony is more palpable, but I think the kind of regular conflict that happens, there are very interesting ways of these staying masked and invisible. So the idealizing and utopian attitudes to art that deliberately ignore or neutralize this conflict, like for example, commonly we say that festivals are a marker of social unity or cohesion, or that arts and religions are collective impulses that affirm human relationships. So this in fact is what Heidegger said, that they affirm human relationships, etc. So there are many such statements, positions, what you might even call cliches, which have emerged in the process, where the utopianism sort of an idealization masks the kind of reality below. Then, because of that, we have developed methods, again through mass practices as well as more concentrated, academic practices, to develop a hermeneutic, to develop a methodology of reading that which is masked. How will you read it? How will you uncover it? How will you unmask it? And that strategy of interpretation, as they say, where I can look at the same dance, I can hear the same music, and I can, 10 of us can interpret it in 10 different ways. And working with a hermeneutic of interpretation, working with a methodology of reading those signs is something that helps in the what one would call restoration of meaning, where you're trying to hide the conflict, you return the conflict back into the debate and put it back on the table. For example, a classic, sort of example is Ibsen's Doll's House, where Nora, in the last final scene, goes out and bangs the door shut. Now, this banging the door shut can have such interesting interpretations and translations and reviewings and repositionings, and it can be a political act, it can be a feminist act, it can be a individual act, it can be a critique of marriage. It has a very, very interesting range of possibilities that it affords. So then the function of criticism therefore then becomes to unravel that which is hidden. It is not to describe, as in a review mode, Sri Sayyid Haidar Raza's painting is there, and it has got 15 triangles in it, and it's got 4 squares in it, It has got 6 circles in it. One is red, one is blue, one is green. That's not the function of criticism. That's the function of someone who makes a dobe list. So criticism would be able to unmask in that painting the hidden meaning, the hidden conflict, the hidden discourse that is going on, and be able to articulate that, present it to us in a manner that draws us into it in such a way that we can agree or disagree. The function of criticism is again not to make everybody conform to one point of view. The whole idea is to be able to position a point of view in such a manner that one can debate it. For me, one of the most interesting, let's say, examples of critical practice in the media, in the world of writing about the arts. Some of you might have heard about this incident. It relates to a very interesting exhibition that happened in London. It opened at the Tate Modern in the year 1999, if I'm not mistaken. Exhibition called Sensation. Many of you might have heard it. An exhibition of 35 of Britain's most promising young artists of that time, which included Damien Hirst, at that time a young unknown sort of artist. It opened in Tate Modern, and it had some really weird stuff in there. Damien Hirst, for example, had done that work, the 27-foot-long shark. What's it titled? The Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, or something like that. So you enter there, it's in a glass case, absolutely beautiful shark, aerodynamic features and shiny, and you say, oh, what a great creation of nature, and so on and so forth, and you gush over it, and then you go behind. He has put it through a mechanical saw and sawed the entire shark in half. So when you go, and of course it's resin sealed and all that, so you go on the other side and you see what the shark has had for breakfast and for lunch and for dinner, and everybody starts vomiting. So it had that, this very interesting juxtaposition of beauty and ugliness, if you want to simplify it like that. Another artist who had decided to make a pile-up of 30 days, 1 month, 30 days of his own shit. Pile, and it's an installation, etc., etc. It outraged people, and there was a furor, and born-again Christians were coming with mashals to burn the place down, and there were huge protests outside, and within 6 or 7 days, within a week, that exhibition had to be shut down, and newspaper after newspaper had attacked it, and critic after critic had attacked it, and the whole thing shut down. But already, even before it had opened at Tate, the Brooklyn Art Academy had already booked it, so 4 or 5 months from then, in New York. And so on that appointed date, on October or something, it traveled there and the show was to open. But the notoriety of the exhibition had preceded the exhibition. So even 1 week before it opened, New York Times wrote an absolutely devastating critique in their arts page, saying this, as it were, this shit should not come to New York, and so on. Our children should not be assaulted with this kind of nonsense. And already the crowds collected. So on the date the exhibition was to open, there was a huge crowd outside, all protesters holding placards and saying down, down, close it down, this, that, and the other. It looked like in Brooklyn it won't even last 3 days, let alone the 7 days in London. Until on the 4th day, a very interesting review appeared in one of those wonderful magazines that comes out of America called The Nation. It's something like America's EPW, if you want it, in which their art critic, someone whom I respect hugely, Arthur C. Danto, wrote this 5-page article on this exhibition. You can't call it a review, it's an article. And it begins like this. I went to see Sensation with my 8-year-old nephew. And this 8-year-old, the next like 2-3 pages is all about what this 8-year-old nephew is doing in front of those exhibits. The 8-year-old nephew goes in front of this shark and he says, oh, wow. And he goes in front of this tower of shit and he says, oh, gee. And he's getting excited and he's wanting to touch it and he's going all around. And the writer slowly brings it down to this basic question, where have you left your childhood? Why have you left it behind? Why can't you have the eyes of this child who is not coming with a judgmental view and is able to respond in a particular manner to the works of 35 young artists who are trying to break through what a show called Dussahas. They were doing Dussahas. And you won't believe it. 3 days later, the New York Times review, the same person who had done a preview attacking it, changed his opinion. He said, I went back to see the exhibition after having read Arthur's piece, and I must say I made a mistake. This doesn't happen in the media. Across the world, I won't apologize to you and you won't apologize to me. It's not possible, but here it was a fantastic act of fraternity that this reviewer said, I apologize, I made a mistake, I've seen the exhibition again, and hey boy, there's something here. And it went on to be a big success, both critical as well as, these protests all died down and people came in hordes and it became a big scene, and they all got launched into, which is the worst part of it. The culture industry stepped in and they're all multimillionaires now, all these 35. And how one describes their art today will be completely different from how we will critique and describe their art at that point. So I think basically this is what I want to say. I think one needs to keep in mind this framework. One needs to keep in mind, I can have much to say about the media because the Times of India moment of shutting down the arts page happened when I was there. And I was the arts editor of Economic Times, and we had 4 pages a week for the arts. Times of India had 2 a week. Economic Times had 4 a week. It was a national page. It went to 7 different cities in the country. And one fine day, the paper decided, don't want it. We don't think our readers need it. They have, of course, theories on the marketing is always a fantastic, ingenious thing. They always have theories for why something will work or not work, and they have logic for it. So, for example, what I was told was that the paper and its coverage of the arts, we are going to reconfigure it into a coverage of entertainment. There's no longer art in the country; it's all entertainment. And therefore, in entertainment, all that is worth responding is to that which is like froth in a beer mug, that which rises to the top. What is below is irrelevant. So we just cover that froth. So they developed a language for it, and they're very clever, they're very successful, they develop languages, they develop theories, they develop patterns of sales, etc., etc. And it became a success formula, meaning the moment the Times of India decided to do that, every other paper worth its salt thought, market leader is doing something special. And if market leader is doing it, there must be some logic to it. So within a week, Indian Express, which had an 8-page weekend pullout of arts, dropped it. It was being, produced as a turnkey venture by Tarun Tejpal. It was very good they did, because then he could go and start the Helka. But the fact is that next week they dropped it. Hindustan Times said, hey, the biggest rival is doing it. So they went and stopped their 4 pages in the weekend. Telegraph had a 8-page pullout on Saturdays edited by SADANAND Gupta. They nixed it. And so on, Pioneer, and down the line, everybody went. The only paper that didn't do anything to its art space was the Hindu, because in fact the Hindu doesn't have an art space. It's a completely unrational space. You don't know why it is happening. Some religion is coming next to some contemporary theatre, and some temple is coming next to some fashion thing, and just don't know what the logic of all this is, but it happens. But Hindu, it's amazing. Hindu has, if you count, 86 pages a week for what could be called cultural coverage. 86. No paper in India, no paper in the world probably has it. If you put all the supplements together, 86 pages a week. There's no arts editor. How can you do it? You have a political page editor, you have an op-ed page editor, you have a sports editor, you have an editor-in-chief, but no arts editor. I'm sorry, that's being unprofessional. And that's one of the problems with the media practice, that unprofessionalism has grown. And since the time the Times of India sort of detached itself from arts coverage and all the other papers did, the practice of arts coverage has declined. I won't say disappeared, has declined, and has become kind of a new kind of gibberish. Where it's got kind of a meaningless kind of discourse that happens. Vandalism of the worst kind. The review thing has continued. There are book reviews, there are film reviews, there are theatre reviews, and as and when space comes, they do something. So, but I think the more critical factor of getting seriously into the business has sort of vanished. But should I be despondent about it? I'm not sure. I'm not despondent because, again, one of my favorite authors happens to be Bertolt Brecht. And Brecht has this wonderful little poem which I'd like to read. It's called On the Critical Attitude. The critical attitude strikes many people as unfruitful. That is because they find the state impervious to their criticism. But what in this case is an unfruitful attitude is merely a feeble attitude. Give criticism arms and states can be demolished by it. Canalizing a river, grafting a fruit tree, educating a person, transforming a state, these are instances of fruitful criticism and at the same time instances of art. Thank you.
Well, in the prescribed time. But I'm glad that he did it because he raised many issues. And before we open it to the House, if you two of you have to say something, you're free to say that. Would you like to? You want to?
Bhadrachar.
Bhadrachar.
No, I just wanted to say something, just very small things like I quite, I don't know, sometimes I wonder because of course you would have seen a lot of things in the performing field. I wonder sometimes whether we are mistaking the outside for the inside. And it's the same with, I mean, say we take Bharatanatyam and we need to throw the whole caboodle out. Maybe we need to throw the outer trappings out. And I don't think if we take somebody like, well, Chandralekha was considered she was considered an iconoclast. But the people who were also considered very traditional embraced her work completely because they saw that this was the essence of dance. So I think that if people are giving the impression, maybe the majority is giving the impression that we are seeing an Apsara on stage and we should go as a devotee, maybe people are willing accomplices in that, but one should not then grace them with the designation of a critic. If that is the state of affairs, yes, that's not right, but that doesn't mean necessarily that that is in the essence. It's something that needs to be tackled. And as for sensitivity of artists goes, I do feel that still they're very sensitive. It doesn't mean that they're not violent and that they won't have blood on their hands. I think they might react very violently. So in that sense, I don't think that there's a disagreement as far as I'm concerned. Artists come out with all kinds of things, but when they come out with something, it may be something very violently disagreeing and something which is intended to rattle the public. People say, I don't want you to enjoy my dance. I don't want even things like pretty, which is a very different approach to aesthetics than what we inherit when we learn classical dance. But they say this, I don't want this, I'm breaking the barriers and I'm saying something and critiquing our society. But the moment a critic, and I am talking about the popular media because that's what I belong to. Of course, there are wonderful researchers. There's great research happening and people are writing beautifully. But how many people are getting there? If we're talking about the popular media, it's because the popular media is going to many more people. So the minute such an artist who may have blood on their hands presents this, the minute somebody says that, well, I thought it didn't make sense or I thought it was, overset, then they feel upset about it very often. That's what I'm trying to say, that they do feel upset about it. And both ways, the critic has to try to get to the root of it, and in all ways, the artist has to try to get to the root of a situation and the critic has to get to the root of why this thing is being said, like the New York Times person did. And the last thing that I want to say is, yes, I completely agree that we have a great tradition of commentary, and but our education system takes us away from that. The more educated you are, the less you know your indigenous languages, and the less you know about your culture and the traditions, and the thought and cultural memory tends to evaporate. And therefore, we start with Abhinav Gupta, but we do very quickly switch to the New Yorker or to the New York Times, or we talk about Brecht. We don't talk about how Kalidas transformed Shakuntala from a strong woman in the Mahabharata to what she became in his play, or how he transformed maybe Urvashi from the Vedic Urvashi to what she became in his play. So I'm only saying that we are living in a society full of dichotomies. And maybe we're in the same sphere, we're not on the same side.
I would like to उस तरह का काम वो तभी होता है जब कोई समाज में, राजनीति में कोई बहुत बड़ी घटना हो रही हो. रशियन रिवॉल्यूशन के वक्त इन रशिया there was path breaking work was done in literature, in cinema, in all spheres of creative activity. And during the national movement in our country, great number of writers, poets, dramatists, musicians, they came up. Similarly, in the 60s, if you remember when the so-called Naxalite movement erupted, it brought great upheaval in, at least I am familiar with Hindi literature, in Hindi poetry, in Hindi writing. So what I am saying is that at the moment the greatest social upheaval is Anna Hazare. So what can you expect from creative artists, writers or musicians or dancers or painters? So one. Secondly, there is a great tradition of commentary, but commentary was not just commentary. It was when Abhinav Gupta commented on previous thinkers or theoreticians. He was not only commenting, he was developing the ideas, and he was offering his own new critical insights and sometimes new theories about creation of art. So it is not simply commentary. And we had an unbroken tradition of aesthetic theorizing till Pandit Raj Jagannath, who was a contemporary of Shah Jahan. And after Pandit Raj Jagannath, that somehow the tradition came to an abrupt end. And after that, now we really have commentaries. When people write on his theories or the theories of Abhinav Gupta or other theoreticians, these are now commentaries because people are not adding anything to that. Thirdly, what Anjana said about the sensitivity of creative artists, musicians or dancers. Every creative person is a very sensitive person, so that goes without saying. But I have seen lot of creative persons being very insensitive towards other creative persons. So it's very difficult to go to a performance and be in love with the performer just because he is on the stage. In the past 1 year since I have started writing for the Hindu, I have tried my best not to know any organizer or any musician. I go to a performance, sit at the last row in the last seat, listen to it and come back. Just because if I write good or bad, whatever, at least nobody can accuse me of a personal bias because I don't know the person who is performing and I don't want to know. I just want to know his or her art. But as you said about the reader, that reader is very happy seeing a very good picture. The same applies to musicians. They don't read the review. and their most of the time their grouse is that picture nahi aayi hamari. Because they are not bothered about what you have written. They are bothered about hamari picture. If suppose there is a festival where 10 musicians performed, like Shankar Lal, the 3-day festival. Now everybody's photo can't be printed. Then the entire Friday review will be full of, Shankar Lal. So then whosoever, and then they think that it is the music critic who has told the editor whose picture to publish and whose picture not to publish. So what I'm saying is that these are the artists themselves are not very serious about this whole thing. And thirdly, as SADANAND said about this whole thing of blood, I mean, I would not be as gory about this, but certainly I was reminded of Mukti Bodh's Nai Kavita Ka Atma Sangharsh, because every creative person goes through this process of Atma Sangharsh. You are struggling with yourself, within yourself, and trying to discover or rediscover various things within yourself and in your art. So that constant struggle, it goes on. There is no doubt about it. And lastly, I would say something like the point which I tried to make, that people who and this traditional way of, like he told about Bala Saraswati's comment, that person is it's a very what I should say, desi way of making a comment. So earlier there was this kind of a tradition among musicians, who used to listen to each other. Now that practice has also disappeared. That I don't see very many musicians in music concerts these days. Musicians don't want to listen to other musicians. But earlier this was not the case. So in fact the etiquette of a music mehfil was that in the first row, only those persons were allowed who were real ustads, and who could ask a person to stop if they didn't, find him or her. Those days it was him. So, and then, people were graded according to their, and there have been instances when people got up and snatched the tanpura from the hand of the singer, that are you singing Malkons or Bhairavi? You see. Or I am told about a great ustad who sang a rag, and he asked his nephew after that how did you like it? So he said, Mama madham ka pet nahi bhara. So this is a very profound critical comment which can come only from somebody who is from that tradition. I think that cannot come from a music critic who writes 500 words for a newspaper. So this is what I just wanted to butt in.
मुझे याद आता है एक बार हम लोग, मैं और रश्मि दक्षिण गए हुए थे, वहाँ से लौटे तो कुमार गंधर्व के घर पहुँचे, देवास में जा रहे थे उज्जैन। तो वहाँ उनका बेटा मुकुल शिवपुत्र, जो कि बहुत ही प्रतिभाशाली कलाकार है, तो हमने कहा कि लगता है दक्षिण में लोगों को व्याकरण का बहुत ज्ञान है। हम बहुत सारी संगीत सभाओं में गए, तो वहाँ चाय वाय या कॉफ़ी के लिए जब लोग बाहर आते थे तो आपस में जो बातचीत होती थी वो व्याकरण की होती थी, कि इसमें ये नहीं लगा, इसमें मध्यम नहीं था, इसमें फला नहीं था, ये नहीं था। तो इस पर मुकुल शिवपुत्र ने कहा कि अशोक जी यही तो रोना है, व्याकरण है मगर कला नहीं। तो कुमार जी एक झूले पर बैठे थे, ऐसा था झूला झूल रहा था, वो रुक गए। उन्होंने कहा राजा बिना छंद के फूल नहीं खिलता है। अब दैट काइंड ऑफ अ स्टेटमेंट कि बिना छंद के फूल नहीं खिलता है, ये एक संगीतकार ही कह सकता था। पहले ज़माने में ऐसा था। एक बार मुझे विंदा करंदीकर ने, जो मराठी के बड़े प्रसिद्ध कवि थे, उन्होंने बताया कि वो संगीत के बड़े प्रेमी थे। बड़े गुलाम अली खान साहब से मिलने गए, तो कुछ बात हो रही थी, तो उन्होंने कहा देखो मौसीकी तो मूरत जैसी है, कुछ कम तो बहुत कम, कुछ ज़्यादा तो बहुत ज़्यादा। अब ये इस तरह की उक्तियाँ तो कलाकारों से ही आएंगी, वो संभवतः आलोचना से The other thought that occurs to me, is it that the critical spirit has now shifted to creativity itself? That it lodges itself more sort of enduringly and more stubbornly in the creativity itself rather than be outside it. So, I mean, there might be elements, I mean, after all, a critical activity and the creative activity cannot be divorced from each other so completely. A great critic will also be, in some seminal sense, also a very creative person. You think of any great critic and he will also be a very creative person. And also a creative person who may not write criticism like T.S. Eliot did or others did, but who may still have creativity within within the body of the artistic work itself. I think I can think of a lot of visual arts, at least, or in theatre, if not in dance and music. But I would say that there are musicians who offered a critique of the others without claiming that. Kumar Gandhar was a musician who offered a critique of other musicians by doing the same thing but doing it so differently. And yet, सब राग वाग का जो भी वो है व्याकरण बिल्कुल ठीक है लेकिन राग बिल्कुल अलग रख रहा है. And that was a critique. So there might be an area of even looking at creative works themselves as part of the critique. But then I don't want to take your time. We have some time for questions, and the best questions are brief. And of course,
Answers.
Opinions which are very, very precise and not in too many words. So go ahead. Anyone? First, only the first question is a difficult one. Somebody has to do that dussahas and then the rest will follow. Yes, please. Rajiv, you are looking as if you are going to ask something. No?
Disappearing criticism.
Yes, there's a lady. Yeah, please. Take the, and say who you are.
My name is Raza. I'm wondering whether perhaps there's some overlap in the discussions we're having and criticism as we see it often in our daily discourse or in our popular media with different mediated and other concerns of marketing, for instance, or the culture industry. I'm not saying that these are two widely separate arenas either, but it seems to me that that to understand the dynamic as that rather than to say there used to be. Because from what you're saying, there's a particular specialist critique that it's not a question of the fact that it used to exist and no longer does. It does exist. It just exists in a different space. So,
That's a comment. That's not a question, is it? As I understand it.
I'm just wondering whether instead of worrying about the fact that it used to be a particular way and no longer is, whether we should look at spaces in which we can find this critical activity now happen and are produced.
Sure.
But I also think that when you say these clear critical comments you hear in discussions, but they're always informal, they're always off the record. Because I have found that people don't want to come into the public space. Nobody wants to stick their neck out, the ones who are really specialists, because there's a prevailing notion, kisi ke bure kyun bane. Privately you'll see it, you don't want to go with your byline and say it. And the other thing I find maybe why criticism, the so-called criticism is very weak in the papers and all that. There's another prevailing notion I find that is, the emperor's new clothes syndrome. How can I say that it made no sense to me, I don't understand it, how can I go to the artist and say, what is it that you're really trying to say? I think that, all of us, if I am the writer, then I should be able to admit that I might make a mistake. I should be able to say it made no sense to me, I can't even write about this, let me not touch it. Or I can, respond from my heart and say, this is what it said to me. But maybe there's not that much of it happening, so it's safest to describe it and then get on with things. Because then you'll fill your 500 words easily.
Yes, yes, finally, you warmed up.
I'll just make a comment.
Okay, good.
Which is that I think we should simply compare what's happening today with, say, 30, 35 years ago. Not with, I mean, it's perfectly valid to do it
No,
in
no.
any time frame.
We have been there for too long, so we can compare with thousands of years.
And some of us have been there only for 40 years.
Yes, yes, of course.
You know, I think what we've witnessed in the last 30, 40 years are two things very palpable. One is, you know, a certain kind of democratization, which means that in 30, 40 years ago, there was a consensus on what those evaluative norms are by which we judge works of art, different kinds of works of art. But today there is a proliferation of those evaluative norms. There's no single set of norms by which we judge. There are a number of them. And when there is a proliferation of these evaluative norms, two things happen which are very, which when combined together produce something very strange. One is great uncertainty about those norms. We are not any longer certain about the truth or soundness or validity of those norms. But the second thing that happens that accompanies that uncertainty is that each one of us is holding on to them very dogmatically. So there's bound to be, I mean, this is a space where criticism cannot really survive. And I think, I know that we should look for criticism in different places and so on. That is true. But in a public space, the widest possible public space that all of us can share, I agree that this criticism doesn't exist or is disappearing. The second is, commodification. Huge amount of commodification. Where is the place for criticism when everything is commodified? आजकल हिंदी में बोले तो सब अपनी दुकान खोलते हैं और अपनी दुकान खोल के लोग दूसरे के पास जा अट्रैक्ट कर रहे हैं सबको कि तू मेरे पास आ और प्राइवेटली बोलते हैं कि उसके पास मत जा लेकिन पब्लिकली थोड़ी ना बोलेंगे और ये हर चीज में है बहुत चीजों में है हर चीज में नहीं. And of course there are places where there are some people who are critical of this and they write against it, but they're not heard and they're not seen. And so in a way both are true. The fact that real criticism is marginalized and also that it hasn't really fully disappeared. It does exist somewhere and we've got to search and
No, I agree with you. I'm just wondering whether at some level real criticism has always been marginalized or a specialist activity. We tend to glorify it as being something that was very popular. I think it had more space than it does now in a commodified present. But it has always been a specialist activity at some level. That was my...
Yeah, but Rajiv, was there any time there was this kind of a Satyug when there was only one single norm?
देखिए ये सतयुग हमारे लिए 1950 में तो था.
I don't know.
मुझे लगता है अभी आप ऐसा नहीं मैं ये मोमेंट्स ऑफ सतयुग वो कभी कभी आते हैं. ऐसा नहीं है कि सारा का सारा कलयुग हमेशा ही रहता है. बीच में दो चाहे 5 साल के लिए चाहे 6 साल के लिए चाहे 10 साल के लिए और लोगों की मेमोरी में आ जाता है और उसको वो याद करते रहते हैं. अब मुझे नहीं पता कि एक्चुअली था कि नहीं ये तो मैं नहीं जानता लेकिन इतना जरूर जानता हूँ कि अब हमारी कंस्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली में जितने सारे लोग बैठे थे उन्होंने एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन प्रोड्यूस कर दिया. आज आप करके देखिए नहीं कर पाएंगे कोई एग्रीमेंट नहीं होगा. वो सचो की कहेंगे हम
In that sense, yes.
और क्या तो किसी चीज में एग्रीमेंट हो गया एक छोटे से एरिया के लिए तभी जाके वो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पैदा हुआ. नहीं तो आप लड़ते रहिए उसके लिए कुछ नहीं पैदा होगा.
Yes, this lady there. Yes.
मैं जो क्या कर रही हूँ वो दुस्साहसी कर रही हूँ क्योंकि मुझे कला और संस्कृति का बहुत ज़्यादा पता नहीं।
भद्राचार्य।
एक चीज़ जो मुझे लगी कि एक तो हम बार बार अपने डिस्कशन में क्रिटिक और क्रिटिसिज्म के बीच एक तरह से दूसरी करना जा रहे हैं, लेकिन और वो दायरा होना भी है, लेकिन दोनों के बीच के संबंध को बहुत ज़्यादा अच्छे से हम लोग सामने नहीं लाते। लेकिन दूसरी चीज़ ये थी कि ये जो बात आ रही है कि किस दौर में कला या किस तरह की क्रिएटिविटी और सृजन होता है, तो एक सवाल, आई एम अ सोशल साइंटिस्ट, द क्वेश्चन दैट आई हैव इज इफ यू लुक एट सोसाइटी टुडे, द conditions are far too revolting and far too shattering to dare to move out and look at the lives of the people. How is it that our art is so divorced that kind of critique which should be coming? Because is it that are we so close to the establishment, that we are so much part of the establishment, that there is no critique emerging from within it, and therefore the criticism is also sort of dwelling within the market, within the commodified space that is existing, or what is it? But I mean, it is not as if the context in which we are living is any less invigorating or demanding of a very, very sharp criticism and of a sharp critique. So what is it that is failing on our part, whether it's the artist or the critic, that it's that is not being addressed? To me, as a social scientist, it emerges as a very big gap. And I mean, as a social scientist, as a person existing in the society, we're all looking for something like that. Whether it's in poetry, whether it's in theatre. After all, earlier art, if you say, if it was criticism, it was commentary. It was also criticism and commentary on that society. But today, are we getting that? I don't know. I mean, at least we're looking for much more, I would say. So it's just a sense of wanting more from art and criticism.
Yeah, please.
My name is Raza. I come from academics, so I am very glad about this question this comment and question that she asked. I'm also very concerned about this because this is kind of in connection with this discussion that we had about entertainment, kind of consuming the notion of art, in the media. So I am interested actually, some of the panelists can answer this question. When I'm looking at this is a statement that we make, but I actually want to know, your responses on why this paradigm should happen, if at all, it happened at some historical point, what would be the reasons? And I also want to kind of look at this room, where we are discussing this kind of an issue. How many of us come from outside, completely outside the art world? In some way or the other, we are all linked with poetry or art or some kind of connection. That's why I said, so when we are talking about a space like the media, like a newspaper, which is open to everybody. So at some point, if the media has decided that this particular thing is not open for everybody, this is not really accepted by everybody, is there some kind of reason from within the art world, which is kind of it's becoming isolationist in some manner,
I think we have had this holy cow attitude always. And there are certain people about whom you just cannot write anything that is not flattering. And I, who've been writing on dance, know to my cost. Now recently in Chennai, I happened to see a dancer, I won't mention names, who did Kuchipudi. And she runs an enormous school and she's got endless number of students and any number of programs all the time, and people talk very highly of her. And I saw her dance at the Music Academy and I thought she was terrible. And I said so in my review. The papers kept ringing me up and saying, please, we want to review. I said, forget it. I don't want to review this person Because what she did was so completely beneath notice that you'll be wasting paper on it, and I know there's going to be a reaction which is going to be very adverse. But they insisted, no, you must write, it doesn't matter what you have to say. And in very polite language, I said what she did was bad. And then she started sending me messages on the email and on the telephone. I mean, she came out with a whole lot of Telugu words. She said, you know the meaning? These are all meant. This is what you are. Go and look up the meaning. You are this, you are that. I mean, there was not a single invective she did not hurl at me. Now, when you are criticizing a person who is extremely, venerated in the field, it is a problem. Because the minute you say something, then, the whole world comes down on you like a ton of bricks. You cannot say anything. So I have always told the papers, please do not write anything about these people. Let them do what they are doing and forget about it. You write about the younger people, about whom you can be slightly critical. Of course, I know that SADANAND thinks that there is no such thing as critiquing at all in our country. Now, I love his irreverence, I would go miles to listen to it. But, I have been thinking about it very often. When I go to a particular music concert, and there is something which takes me out of myself, makes me experience a space which would not be accessible otherwise, which I have never visited, a space which I have never experienced otherwise. I think it is a great concert. Yeah. And if they have used the classical medium and the music that we all talk about, why should that be thrown out of the window? Similarly in dance, even in Bharatanatyam, about which of course SADANAND, the MENON, speaks in the most derogatory terms that you can think of, there is a lot that is terrible. I would be the first person to agree with that. But there is that occasional program which gives you something that is exceptional, that again makes you experience something which you wouldn't otherwise. And I don't care whether it's a commentary on life or it's not a commentary on life. I think it reaches out to a space inside which is very important for me in the arts. Yeah. And how can you say that all this has to be completely discarded?
Sada, sorry, Leja, after your outburst, there are very humorous instances also in criticism where we like her, I don't give the names, but dancers go to the level of filing suitcases, legal notice, etc. Now that doesn't work. Never works. Whether it was X or Y, neither the critic was thrown out, neither the dancer suffered from her professional level, etc. Today, after this article by SADANAND MENON on Kalakshetra and Kurukshetra, there is some dialogue. And SADANAND made a point about the exceptional unity that the performing art unity has shown this time, the community has shown regarding the person who resigned. And I was telling SADANAND that if it is so, why these voices are not being heard by the Minister of Culture? He said it will be wishful thinking. I do not think it will be really wishful. If the artists have, the community has felt collectively, I think there could be some leadership would emerge. Like you were saying about that, is it within from the artist? What is happening? You were questioning that part of that. I do believe that sensitivity part of the artist is also, in a way, becomes at stake if there is no space. If there was not so much space given today for this particular issue which is being discussed everywhere else, I don't think the thought-provoking things would have come out, etc. For instance, the suggestion for having the course in the university. I taught in the university in Ravinder Bharati and JNU, and it was very difficult to bring out to the vice chancellor. He said, but what is the possibility of the potential of employment? Now, there is a potential employment right now, what is happening to the cultural institutions now. If there are courses like that, it would help. I do not know, SADANAND, in what way, when economic times decided not to have and then everybody else followed, and what you said about marketing, etc., those theories, if there is no space today, and if Hindu is not giving the space to any other paper, I don't know this criticism, this debate to be generated. as you said, or Rajiv said, there must be another spaces where you can go and look up for, like EPWD or other white paper, etc. But it is important that collectively maybe artists have tried, but we have not found a way where they have 2 pages for sports and not a single page for the arts.
I would actually want all of you to respond to the question that I asked. I'm really interested in that.
No, I spoke too much.
No.
I mean, it's kind of a debate that really cannot develop without probably laying the parameters within which we are discussing this. So it will be futile to just offer spontaneous comments, I think. But, no, like for example, let me see this. Huh? No. There's a very important kind of a financial survey company called PricewaterhouseCoopers. And PricewaterhouseCoopers was entrusted by the government of India to do a survey of Indian economy and its growth rates. And it's a very thick tome, it's about 800 pages, and it looks at every sector in India, energy and transportation and education. And there's a significant chunk on culture and entertainment. And they have found that what's called the compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, of the entertainment company is growing globally. Everywhere around the world. In the year 2008, it was showing a 6.3% increase globally, which means it rose from $1.2 trillion in 2004 to $1.8 trillion in 2008. So that's a huge, in 4 years, it's really made a huge jump. But in the same period, that 4-year period, the growth within India and China in this sector was over 10%. So whereas globally it's growing at the rate of 6%, 6 point something percent, in India and China it's growing about 10%. Now within this then they segmented which areas are growing more and what is accounting for this leap and jump. And they found that the biggest sort of leaps are being made by video games, internet advertising, and book publishing, very interestingly. Now, this statistic in the year 2008, so that is 4 years ago, has led to very interesting consequences 4 years down in 2012. You had some amazing sort of incursion into India by the global entertainment multinationals. Leading the charge, Walt Disney. Walt Disney has come in with a $2 billion program within India, which will include all these sectors: video production, internet advertising, it will get into book publishing, newspapers. They're wanting to buy over papers like Dainik Bhaskar, etc., because they say the Hindi media is the biggest growth sector in India, and so on. So now, when this kind of thing happens, I mean, we are kind of innocent about it. We don't really, we know something is happening, but we are not precisely sure exactly what is happening. But you see changes happening in the media for which you have no easy explanation. Why is it that KULDEEP Kumar is no longer writing his music review? Why is it that ANJANA is taken out of her dance review? Why is it that in that space something else is coming, fashion or beauty contest or something or the other? What accounts for this kind of change, which the media feels no compulsion to explain to you that tomorrow we are going to change our paper in this particular. It just happens over a period of time, and then you realize that these compulsions then determine, in one sense, both the practice and language of criticism. So, in one sense, this is an overarching criticism that is happening. The economy is placing a criticism on social practice and saying that, sorry, we are going to do this, till yesterday I'm selling from my dukaan, I'm selling religious literature, and tomorrow I convert that into pornography. It's my space. Times of India logic. It's my space. I do what I want. I sell space. It's ad space, it's new space. I sell it. So this whole change that is happening is definitely going to impinge on critical practices, on languages, on depth, on how much you want to engage with what is happening. And with the result, I mean, the point that Ashok made right in the beginning, that I can today name, just sitting here, probably 15 outstanding Indian artists, painters, let's say, young artists, who had great exhibitions, sell-out exhibitions around the world, but about him there has not been one article in the Indian media, not one. The Indian audience doesn't know them. Book to chodo, there's not even been an article. So that's a kind of amazing context that is developing. On the other hand, I can say with a bet that tomorrow if the Raza Foundation invites some of us to organize a seminar on this great dance form called Bharatanatyam, I will not be able to produce, if it's a 2-day conference with say 8 scholars talking about Bharatanatyam, I will not be able to produce 2 scholars from India. The entire research, documenting, archiving of Bharatanatyam is happening in Canadian, American, British universities. In the last 4 years, 8 major books have appeared. 8 major books, looking at the Devadasi history, looking at the Southern tradition, looking at Telugu Padams, all sorts of things. Nothing here. Of course, we have university departments, but what is happening there? So that sense of a process, as it is called, when that doesn't exist, then I think it's being delusionary to imagine that we are engaging in critical practice. I think we need to be a little more serious about engaging with the question itself. So one is this post-liberalization economy that is evacuating the idea and meaning of criticism completely, eventually you again go back to Naipaul, murder as another form of critique, when that fatwa went on Salman Rushdie. So the biggest critics of Indian society, art, architecture, economy are obviously the gun-toting Maoists. That seems to be the words have escaped. Words are not reaching anywhere. You take some other route. You take a bypass route. So I think and therefore, I mean, without sounding alarmist, one would like to call it a crisis. There is a crisis of language and critique here, and a crisis of even being able to, describe this in any cogent sort of way.
Any other? Well, I just would like to point out that what we have been talking about is mostly about criticism that's written in English. Whereas about the arts, there is a long tradition in many so-called regional languages, which are as good national languages as any others. That area should not be completely forgotten out of our consideration. Secondly, maybe that we are not reading more carefully what's happening, for instance, in literature. I mean, I got an impression from this side that literature is very divorced from what's happening in terms of social reality and what it is. I don't think that is a true impression. I think a lot of questioning, a lot of interrogation, a lot of self-criticism, etc. is taking place in poetry, in fiction, and in critical writing. I know at least about Hindi, but also in other languages. So I think that should not be forgotten. And thirdly, thank you very much for coming. At some point of time we have to finish. We were supposed to finish at 8. It's already past 8:15. Thank you very much for coming. And the third in the series, now in June we are going to take vacation. And in July we will have a discussion on art in public places. And we have Vivan Sundaram, K.T. Ravindran, Subodh Gupta, and Pooja Sood, 4 speakers. Basically, of course, visual art. I mean, so thank you very much for coming, and that's it.
can only go by metro. I know, I've driven by time. And the crowd is so terrifying.
But catch you later on. I had too much to say. I basically specifically said few words. I fulfilled those, I kept going. I had a lot of things to tell you.